Welcome back, everyone. Let's jump back into Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to be finishing out the Hall of Fame of Faith passage. And lest this get too much like a Bible study, I want to do two things. I want to ask the Lord for his blessing on our discussion today, and then give you a little context that I think empowered and inspired and encouraged the Hebrews guy to write this chapter that might fire us up as we listen as well. So let's first of all have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we rejoice as a body today to be called by your name, to be the people of your hand and the sheep of your pasture. And Lord, I pray that you would be gentle and faithful to us today as we read your word together. I pray that the gospel of your grace, the gospel of your constant attention, would leak down into our hearts and give us joy and peace. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So here's the thing. We're going to finish Hebrews 11 today, and we're going to get all the way to the end of the Hall of Fame of Faith. And I want you to remember what this Hall of Fame is all about. There are some folks in the church today that haven't been with us the whole series, and so just a quick review, a quick reminder. This is not actually a list of the good guys and the strong guys and the superhuman heroes of faithfulness that Hebrews guy is reminding us to emulate or to imitate. If we go down through the list and we look at each of their stories, Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Joseph and Rahab the prostitute, we quickly find that this is a list of weak, fearful, unfaithful people who had two things nevertheless in common. The first thing is they believed in the existence of God. And the second thing is they were more or less terrified by the circumstances of their lives. They had those two things in common. And that terror with the circumstances of their lives worked its way out in a couple of different directions. But most often it led them to shake their fist in God's face in one way or another. Abel saying, "Help, I'm dead." Or we could say Abel's blood crying out, "Hey, I was killed illegally. That is not fair." They have these two things in common. They believe God and they are terrified by the circumstances of their lives, and so they respond out of desperation or anger or fear towards God. And the reason that Hebrews guy calls these people examples of faith is because when they lash out in fear or terror or something, they lash out in the right direction. And they say, not to somebody else, but to God himself, "Hey, wait a minute. This isn't how I wanted it to go. Hey, wait a minute. I'm terrified because of what you have done. Hey, wait a minute. I've been rubbed the wrong way by you and your sovereignty." And what we've been saying over the course of months is to shake your fist in the right face is the act of faith. And we actually talked about the book of James last week, and where James talks about, show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. I will demonstrate my life of faith by all of these measurable activities that I'm in the habit of doing. And we suggested that in the context of Hebrews, all of those measurable activities add up to whatever you do after this. Hey, God, that's not fair. God, I am terrified. Is it too much reverb?
Yes.
Just a second.
They're rocking it though.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
And so the man of faith does the works of faith by first of all going, "Ah!" Or with Abel, "I'm dead." Or with Enoch, "I don't want to die." Or with Noah, "We're all going to die." Right? Or with Moses, "How dare you kill the Egyptian?" And then, everybody's going to know. And then running out of town, escaping into the wilderness. The man of faith shakes his fist in the face of God and then does what the book of James tells us, the works of faith, which we talked about last week, basically means whatever comes next. We talked about the fact that the people that James gives us as examples of faith, Abraham and Rahab the prostitute, James picks two examples of faith. Abraham, when he went to offer his son Isaac on the mountain of God, and Rahab the prostitute, who gave a welcome to the spies. Remember that? And we talked about the actions of faith coming from one of two places. Compulsion, Abraham. Hey, Abe, what are you doing? I'm going to take my son up to the top of this mountain and slaughter him on an altar to God. Do you want to do that? No. Why are you doing it? Because I don't have a choice. Because God is compelling me. I can't not do it. But it's a crazy thing to do. I know. You shouldn't want to do that. I don't. Compulsion is one of the things that the sources where we get the works of faith. The other one is desperation. Right? Rahab the prostitute is desperate. She says, the spirit has gone out of all the people of Jericho at the very mention of you and your God. We are desperate. I will do anything to save myself. I will do anything to preserve my life. Here, come here. I'll hide you under these reeds. I will lie to the king of Jericho as long as you guys make a deal. You guys make a deal with me. Promise me that you and your God will save me. To which the spies say, we promise. And Rahab says, good. Then my desperate deal-making worked. The works of faith. She is lauded down through the rest of human history, despite the fact that they always mention her career. Every single time she shows up in the scriptures, her career is mentioned. Nevertheless, she is mentioned as a paragon of faith because out of desperation, she made a deal to save her skin. The works of faith for which she is lauded are the very next thing that happens after she believes God with all her heart and says, that is the real God. The very next thing that happens are the works of faith. And we talked last week about the question of whether we are to imitate Rahab the prostitute in any way, or whether we are to imitate Abraham going up to the mountain of God. We suggested that the reason Rahab the prostitute and Abraham the son slayer might be the examples given to us is because they're so strange that they can't be normative. They can't be the things we're actually supposed to do in order to demonstrate our faith. They're specific to the circumstances. You are not being called to take your child up to the mountain of God and sacrifice him on an altar. You are not being called to take up prostitution as a career and then save spies coming into Jericho and lie to the king. What you're called to do is believe in the existence of God. And then, out of compulsion or desperation, do the next thing as necessary to save your skin. And the wonderful message of the gospel in this chapter is that's what counts as the works of faith. If Hebrews guy had waited until now to write the book, he wouldn't mention you. There was Andrews, scared to death, angry with God, but at least he shook his fist in the right face, and then went and did whatever appeared good to him to save his own skin. Faith and the works of faith. That's a tall one to prove because we read Hebrews 11 a different way a lot. We read it as, well, you got to keep everything under control, and you got to keep the end in mind from the beginning, and you got to be good. But I want to read the rest of Hebrews 11 to you today and see if we can't understand this perspective. Would you please read with me the last chunk, verse 32 to the end of the chapter. Hebrews guy says, and what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. The word of the Lord, Hebrews 11. Here's quite a list, yes? He just crams a bunch of other heroes of the faith into the last part of the chapter, and then doesn't really tell all their stories, but sort of summarizes the great actions and attitudes that they had, right? Let's take a look at these real quick. And by the way, how have you read this chapter your whole life if you've been reading this for years? If not as an example of how you, once your faith is finally mature, are going to start to behave, or should behave. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight, women received back their dead by resurrection. How you doing so far? Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so they might rise again to a better life. Did you used to pray that we would be overrun by a foreign godless enemy so that you could have the chance to be tortured and so earn a place in the hall of faith? I hope not. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. That's a tall order. But here, at the end, he throws us a little sop, because we could probably do these. They went about in sheeps of skin and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. Is this a list for you who aspire to be faithful? Is this a prescriptive list of activities or maybe even attitudes that you're supposed to have? Do you know what each one of the things on this list is? It is a specific reference to a verse in the Old Testament where a prophet, usually, or a king, or somebody that is a character in the Old Testament went through something. I'll just give you an example. I don't have my scroller with me, but look at this. Wandering about in dens and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. Sorry, deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Do you know what that's a reference to? It's King David escaping from Saul, right? Running out of the city and hiding in the wilderness and in literal caves of the earth. Women received their dead back by resurrection. Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, right? And Elisha, soon after, also raised a kid from the dead. It's a specific reference to a specific moment where a specific faithful person had faith and did the works of faith. And do you know what the having faith was in each one of those instances? The same as in every other part of Hebrews 11. Someone shook his or her fist in the proper face and said, "You did this to me." And then did the next thing they could think of to save their skin. This is not a prescriptive list. And you know why? Because you got your own situation, right? You got your own situation. You are being pursued already by your own king, Saul, whoever that is. You've got your own sick child, whatever that particular situation is. You've got your own opportunity to shake your fist in the right face. Hebrews guy says, what more shall I say? The Old Testament that I am trying to explain to you as a preface to the gospel is filled with stories of people just like you guys. Not great heroes, but schleps, just like you, who are overwhelmed by the pain and suffering of this world, and a little bit confused that a sovereign God who's supposed to be loving has dealt it to them like this. And their main concern is with saving their own skin and getting things back to a comfortable, supportable, rational way of living. And Hebrews guy says, this is the essence of faith. And the gospel is therefore good news. because it's something attainable. Who among you lacks the ability to shake your fist in the face of God? We can all do that. Who among you can do the next thing after that, which is desperately look around either by compulsion or desperation to do the next thing to save your own skin? I can. You can. Hebrews guy says, count yourself among the heroes of the faith if you believe in the existence of God and are willing to be desperate. By the way, it's a specific desperation that he's talking about. It's the desperation of Abraham who said, God will himself provide the lamb for the sacrifice. By the way, this sounds like a statement of strength coming from Abraham. You guys remember the story, right? Up to the mountain of God, and Isaac, who's carrying the wood for his own funeral pyre, though he doesn't know it, says, where's the lamb? And Abraham says, God himself will provide the lamb. And I think Moses, who's writing the story to us, has given Abraham the benefit of the doubt. I think what Abraham really said is, heck if I know. No idea. But he and I are going to have words if this goes like I think it's going to go. I mean, I'm compelled, but I also might be furious. God himself will provide the rain, and he better. To which God said, yeah. I had it all along. What about Rahab? What does she do? Out of desperation, out of utter terror and fear, does the next thing. Hebrews guy says, count yourself in that company if this is how you go. From a belief in the existence of God to desperate, compelled action. He finishes chapter 11, though, with an interesting phrase. He says, and all these, though commended through their faith, strange commendation, but there it is, commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. What does that mean? What does it mean that apart from us, the people to whom Hebrews guy is writing, Christians, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect? There is a profound sense in which when Abraham is going up to the mountain of God, though he ended up having an experience with God, a face-to-face experience, there's a profound sense in which his faith, his belief in God's provision, was never ratified in his lifetime. In some senses it was, but in one profound sense it was not. Because his whole life was lived looking forward to something that would not happen until after he died. Rahab's faith, though she was saved from the destruction of Jericho, was until the day she died a faith in something future, and something unseen that she couldn't even imagine, that was beyond her generation. The faith of Moses, the faith of Joseph, the faith of Enoch, the faith of Abel. Those were all truly the confidence of something unseen because of the time and history in which they lived. And Hebrews guy is saying, guess what? You do not live in that time anymore. The thing, the plan that all of those promises pointed to, the idea of the promised land, was a symbol only, guys, a geographical symbol of the Sabbath rest of the people of God, which came in with Jesus, which promise was delivered finally at the cross and in the empty tomb. Those of us who look backward at the story of Jesus have the answer that Abraham was hoping for. And so we have a great gift. Our ability to look back into history perfects the faith of all those heroes. Isn't that great? I know you're thinking, no, not really, I don't really care. Because what I'm really thinking about is my particular King Saul pursuing me into my particular wilderness. What I really care about is my particular death, my particular blood crying out from the ground for resurrection and for justice. I don't care about your theology, Andrews. Tell me a Bible story. I don't care. What I want is relief. What I want is salvation. And so I have to read some from chapter 12 for you. Because Hebrews guy knows that he wasn't done. That the guy who put a 12 in between those two verses didn't know what he was talking about. Listen to chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Hebrews guy saying, I know you enjoyed the story, Jephthah, Samuel, the prophets. This is what it means to you. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, since we can read back in the Old Testament and see the examples of all these people who were just like us, who got terrified and overwhelmed and angry at God, and then scampered around trying to save their skins by any means necessary, let us go and do the same. Let us go and do the same. Let us run with endurance the race set before us. I always read that when I was a kid with the wrong emphasis. Let us run with endurance the race set before us. The focus being on endurance. But I think what he meant is let us run with endurance the race set before us. Just like Abel ran the race set before him, and Enoch ran the race set before him, and Joseph ran the race set before him, and Rahab ran the race set before her. The whole point of Hebrews 12:1 is, what is your race? What is your moment, your Mount of God moment? What mountain are you being compelled to go sacrifice on? What desperation are you scrambling to evade? In what situation is your fist up in God's face? Hebrews guy says this, you are not the first one, but your brothers and sisters with all of them. And you've got something that they don't. You have the ultimate example of how to do this. You have the ultimate example of how to do this right. I'm going to throw you one last curveball and then we'll talk about it. Let us look to Jesus, Hebrews guy says, the author and finisher of our faith. The author and perfecter of our faith. And let us, we read, with our own minds and our own heads, let us do just like Jesus did. And then we read what that means is let us be heroes of the faith just like Jesus was, the ultimate example of all this faithful conduct. Which means, let us endure patiently the suffering that the Lord sends our way, with a good attitude, so that we will be commended for our faith, just like all those other people that had good attitudes and were commended for their faith, right? You know I'm not going to say that. You know I'm going to say something different. Hebrews guy is saying, imitate Jesus by all means. He is the ultimate example of faithful conduct. But he's an example in exactly the same way that Abel and Enoch and Noah and Rahab and Joseph and Moses are examples. What does Jesus do at the cross? What does he do? What does he say? Somebody turn to Psalm 22. What does Jesus do at the cross? If not shake his fist in the face of God. He cries out to God and he accuses. Now, it's an overstatement. Jesus is the Son of God at the same time that he is a man of flesh. And I do not accuse God of accusing. But he does say these words, my God, why have you forsaken me? And if he had his hands free, he would have shaken his fist in the face of God. Jesus believed in the existence of God. But he was angry, you might say, and terrified. We know from the night before, the story of the night before, he sweats blood from his forehead. Why does the human body do that? Terror. It is fear that makes the body do that. He is terrified. Enough to say to God, whom he knows the plan of, I would like to call an audible here and abort. I do not have a good feeling. I am terrified. Please don't make me do this. And then on the cross itself, why did you do this to me? You have forsaken me. That is not fair. I didn't do anything wrong. The circumstances that overwhelm me right now are insupportable. And then he did the very next thing. The very next thing that a physical human body can do in that situation. Died. 100% of people in his situation die. That's the next move. Jesus did exactly what Abel did, exactly what Enoch did, exactly what Noah did, exactly what Rahab the harlot did. Oh no! All is lost. I don't know what to do next. I think I'll do the only possible thing. You guys see what the life of faith looks like? Do you see what the works of faith actually are? Do you see why Hebrews guy says, look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him, because he believed in the existence of God, endured the cross. Not necessarily with a good attitude. It does not say that. What it says is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And what did the Lord do? What did the Lord do? Well, he came through for Jesus like he came through for Abel, like he came through for Abraham, like he came through for Rahab, like he came through for each and every one of us. Brought him back from the dead and sat him beside his throne at his right hand. We are surrounded today by a cloud of witnesses, and we are fortunate indeed that our cloud of witnesses includes not only the stories from the Old Testament of faithful schleps just like us, who out of compulsion or desperation did the next faithful thing, but also an extra 2,000 years of history of people that did it in the name of Jesus as well, and had his example of identical conduct, faith in God working itself out via compulsion or desperation into the next logical, physical thing. I want to say to you before we close today that you are, by virtue of the fact that you believe in God, in his existence, and are also scrambling to do the next thing, men and women of faith that have your place alongside the heroes in this pantheon, not by virtue of your greatness, but by virtue of his greatness, by virtue of the nature of faith, which is dependence, not dependability. Faith is dependence, not dependability. And when we are empty, when we are angry, when we are desperate, we are dependent. The message of the gospel to us in this situation is, all is well. All is well. I, who see the end from the beginning, know the plans I have for you. Plans to do good to you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. And if you don't believe that the Lord can take you, the circumstances through which you struggle right this minute and transform them by his grace and by his power into a hope and a future, it's okay. There's no penalty for that. There's no penalty for that. But it doesn't mean you're right. The God of all the universe is on your side. Thus, Hebrews guy, chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of Faith. And by the way, let me close with this. I want to go back to the beginning of the chapter, before he started in and gave us this several-month tour of this Hall of Fame. What does he say, setting up this chapter? Hebrews 10, verse 37. Yet a little while, and the coming one will come and not delay. He said, you know what, guys? I know you're weary from your suffering. I know you're overwhelmed. And how can it go on one more day? He says, I need to remind you that the Lord has a long-term view of things, but he is not going to delay forever. Yet a little while, and the coming one will come and not delay. But my righteous one shall live in the meantime by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him, which is where Hebrews says, we're not that guy. We're the guy that has faith and is saved. My righteous one will live by faith in the meantime. So what do we do in the meantime? Let's just review. What do we do in the meantime? We look back to our examples of schleps who were terrified, shook their fist in God's face, and then did the next thing, and God was strong in all their weakness. And they were therefore righteous because of their faith, because of the faithfulness of God in their circumstance. And what's the end result of that? My coming one will come and not delay. There's an end to this suffering, and it is in the love and mercy of God. And so Hebrews guy said, look, you need some endurance. You need to be reminded that the one who loves you has it all in hand. In Jesus' name.